bar, sitting at home in a wonderful background. I'm having a cup of tea. My bugs are behind me on the wall. And I'm about to talk about my spirit animal, who we haven't seen since 2004. But get ready, because it's just around the corner, 2021. So I think what we'll do is, as we go along, if you have questions, I'll try to field the questions as we go. If it gets a little hairy and out of control, I might say, okay, let's hold some questions to the end. But with that, I will introduce myself. I am a professor of entomology at the University of Maryland, a fellow of the Entomological Society of America. I have a long history training master gardeners and master naturalists. This is my 1347th presentation, so I never get tired of telling bug stories. So one more tonight will be just a fantastic opportunity to share with you some of my interests and some of the things that we can expect to see next year in 2021 with periodical cicadas. Okay, so the return of old red eyes in 2021. Now they're going to be big, but maybe not that big. Now, cicadas have a wonderful history here in North America. Some of the earliest writings about them date back to the colonial period. There's a report I found here from the 1700s that talked about these strange things that would be found under the ground. They were being found in innumerable little holes in the ground, out of which those insects broke in the form of maggots, which then turned into flies that had a kind of tail or sting, which they struck into the tree and thereby envenomized and killed it. Yikes, that sounds terrifying. The earliest report I can find from Maryland happened in 1751. It was published in the Maryland Gazette. We were informed in some places the locusts had been found in great plenty just under the surface of the earth, almost at their full growth. May God avert our impending calamities. You see, our early colonists had just escaped religious persecution in the old world. They landed here in North America and they said, oh my God, we're back with the locusts again. It's the biblical plague. Now, as most of you know, locusts are a form of grasshopper. Periodical cicadas are much more aligned with what we call the hemiptera, much more closely related to aphids and other sap-sucking insects. So cicadas are indeed not locusts. So people will ask me, so what's the big deal? Don't we see cicadas every year? Well, we have what we call our dog day cicadas, and those guys are singing their hearts out right now in the treetops in my backyard. They usually take from 2 to 8 years to develop underground. They're going to appear usually during our dog days in July through mid-August, trailing off into September. They're greenish in color, and their strategy for survival is stealth and speed. If you've ever tried to find these guys or catch them, it's incredibly difficult. They see you coming a mile away and they fly like F-14s. The periodical cicadas, on the other hand, they're going to be underground for 13 to 17 years. They're going to emerge in separate areas, which we call broods. And they're going to be in mass. They're going to be 1.5 million cicadas per acre emerging where the broods occur next year. They're going to appear from mid-May to June. Their eyes are red, and against the black background with orange wings, we call this aposematic coloration. And their survival strategy is one of the most bizarre of any creature on the planet. They are simply going to fill the bellies of everything that can and wants to eat them, and there will still be enough remaining to perpetuate the species. It's called predator satiation. Now, this is not one species. Of the 17-year cicadas, there are 3 separate species. You can tell them apart by their songs, but also by their coloration. The first one out is septemdecim, that's the largest, which will be followed by Cassini and a lesser abundant species, which is called septendecula. We can tell very easily by looking at their undersides which species is which. Of the 13-year cicadas, there are 4 distinct species: Neotradecim, Tradecim, Tradecassini, and Tradecula. And again, we can tell their differences by their color patterns and by their songs. Now, this is not a singular emergence in simply one place every 17 years. What there are is many, many different broods throughout the United States. What a brood is a well-defined synchronous emergence, either in 17 or 13 years in a distinct location. So as you can see by this map, color-coded, this will be the occurrence of something like brood 10. There are several other broods. Brood 9 emerged last year, brood 8 before that, and so on. There's a nice little chart you can find at one of the websites that tells you when and where the different broods will emerge. There are 12 broods of 17-year cicadas and 3 broods of the 13-year cicadas for a total of 15 broods overall. Now, in history, in recent history, we know that 2 broods have gone extinct. Okay, so there were more broods at one period of time. Which are the broods in our particular region? Well, brood 10 is the big brood that we're going to see next year. As you can see on the smaller scale map, it's going to be heavy in the Midwest and in parts of Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. Brood 8 appeared 2 years ago out in western Pennsylvania, parts of West Virginia, and parts of Ohio. So you can see these are the different broods we have in our geographic area. Brood 7, 2018, brood 8, 2019, brood 9, 2020, this is the brood that just emerged, and brood 10, 2021, which is known as the big brood. These are all broods of 17-year periodical cicadas. Now, when and how did we wind up with the extant broods, the broods that are here? Well, about 3.9 million years ago, the major split between what we call the decula group and the decim group took place. About 2.5 million years ago, decula and cassini split. And then more recently, only about 500,000 years ago, the remaining extant broods became individual broods and their own distinct broods. And it was really only in the last couple 100,000 years that we saw the radiation or the development of all these different broods. Now, why did we unexpectedly see cicadas in 2017? For those of you who followed this, you might have followed my stories at the blog Bug of the Week, and I wrote a lot about this back in 2017. These are what we call stragglers. Stragglers doesn't mean they occur late. What straggling means that they occur off cycle with the major part of their brood. So stragglers can either be early or late. And we had a pretty massive emergence of brood 10 stragglers back in 2017. So much so that some of those stragglers may actually have survived and will either join another brood, the one 4 years earlier from the present brood we're seeing now become part of brood 6, or initiate their own brood. Again, we usually see these stragglers 4 years early or 4 years late, And we think these time travelers are responsible for generating all the different types of broods that we see. So for example, accelerations where they make a time jump 4 years early. So example, the brood 14, if they make a time jump, become brood 10. Brood 10 make a time jump and become brood 6. Brood 6 makes a time jump and becomes brood 2. So we think this is the origin of these 12 different broods we have of the 17-year cicadas. They're time travelers. Now, why the synchrony and prime number thing? Remember, for the survival strategy to work, it's basically going to be stabilizing or winnowing selection, because cicadas that emerge off cycle, ones that emerge a year or two early, number one, they may not find mates. And remember, the strategy here is basically predator satiation. If you emerge early with your foolish genes and the predators take those genes out of the population because there simply are not enough of you to fill the bellies of everything that wants to eat you, those genes will be winnowed out of those populations. The long generation time, there's a couple factors that go into this. Number one, these insects feed on what we call xylem tissue. Xylem tissue is one of the liquid sap tissues in a plant. It tends to be very nutrient poor compared to something like leaf epidermal tissue or parenchyma or phloem tissue, which is very nutrient rich. So number one, they're feeding on a nutrient poor tissue. That could extend their lifetime. Secondly, for this strategy to work, they have to lay large numbers of eggs. And if you're an insect, the way you do this is to become large. Bigger insects can lay more eggs. These are large insects. A lot of people say, well, they're just little insects. Well, some of our parasitic wasps spend their entire life being 0.5 millimeter. So these, relatively speaking, are large insects. This may boost their survival strategy of laying many eggs. And there's another theory that this prime number synchrony during the time of ice ages basically prevented or allowed them to survive random, very severe fluctuations in climate. Okay, this particular theory is a little bit above my pay grade, but the modelers have suggested that prime numbers somewhere between 11, 13, and 15 would be kind of the ideal life cycle for a species, depending on these different strategies for survival. But again, the critical thing is that synchronous massive emergence to fill all the gullets of everything that wants to eat them. So now let's look a little bit at the life cycle of periodical cicadas. During the spring of next year, in March and April, we'll begin to see mud turrets, and we'll begin to see these tunnels, these galleries in the earth. These are basically going to be the escape hatches for the periodical cicadas that have been developing underground for 17 years. And the cells will be anywhere from 1 foot to 18 inches below the surface of the ground. The numbers will be staggering, as I've said, as many as 1.5 million per acre. There will literally be trillions of cicadas emerging next spring. We believe that it's a combination of photoperiod, weather conditions, usually rainfall, spring rains are conducive to the emergence. They're going to time their emergence for twilight and after dark to avoid the predators that are looking for them, the vertebrates that have good visual. And then they're going to emerge when the soil temperatures reach about 64 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is what we'll see. You're probably all familiar with this. You'll see the periodical cicadas. You can tell that they're ready to emerge when you see these two black patches on their thorax. That's where the wing buds will emerge from. So that's how we know they're about ready to go. They're going to move their way across the ground. I'll speed this up a little bit for the sake of time. They're going to have to best terrible environments. They're going to be walking over sidewalks, crossing over roadways. And these are the stages in which the most they're going to make their way to vertical surfaces. And then molt, ecdysis. This is molting. And this is the most critical stage probably in their existence because they're almost totally helpless and vulnerable. So the exoskeleton will begin to split. The teneral adult, the callow adult will begin to emerge. And this process will take approximately 1 to 2 hours to complete to get from the upper left to the upper right. They will then surmount the tree and try to get into the relative safety of the canopy away from predators on the ground. They have a period of about 4 to 6 days when that exoskeleton is hardening before they can fully fly and mate. And they're beautiful at this point in time, as you can see. And once they've emerged and made the way up into the treetop, they're going to plug into the vascular system and begin to feed on xylem. Okay, they will also secrete honey. So when you're standing under the cicada tree, you will get to experience a little golden cicada rain when they're very numerous. Now, how do they make their call? Number one, it's only the males that sing. It's a big boy band up in the treetop. They make their sound with what we call an organ called the timbal organ. This is like a drum head, which they can vibrate to produce a series of sounds. Males are going to chorus most strongly on sunny days in the treetops, and basically this is all about romance at this point in time. You'll hear reports about blue-eyed cicadas. Yes, there are blue-eyed cicadas. It's a genetic mutation. It's I don't know what the frequency is, but I usually see many of these. I've photographed them and seen them almost every year that I've played with cicadas.
Hi, Mike.
Yeah.
Is this a good time to ask you a few questions?
Sure.
How large is each brood, and are they always a single species?
No, they're not a single species. The broods can vary in size and distribution. Some broods are more numerous than others. Remember, it's 3 species emerging simultaneously, more or less, for the 17 years, and 3 or 4 species emerging for the 13-year cicadas.
All right. And I know you mentioned that one of the 3 species of the 17-year periodicals are not as abundant, but out of the other 2 species, is there one that's more abundant than the other?
Yeah, the one that's most common is the septemdecim. That's the first one out. The second most abundant, and these will sort by habitat as well. We usually find the Cassonais here in Columbia, Maryland. I'm in the Patuxent River watershed, and I see mostly Cassonais. If you get into higher woodlands a little bit, you're going to see a little bit more of the septemdecims. So they're going to sort a little bit by habitat type as well.
And just for a reminder for everyone as well as me, which species of those are the larger one?
Septemdecim's the big one.
Okay.
Yep. She's the first one out.
All right. And then two more real quick. Wouldn't brood synchrony be selective as it provides bigger numbers? Is the problem mixing species and thus making mating harder?
I don't think so. In fact, my belief is that the two ones that emerge later are basically piggybacking on top of the first one out, which is the largest one and very often the most common. So I think these other species have kind of snuck in behind it on the coattails. In other words, the first one out is going to get eaten like crazy. So if you can sneak in behind it, you're pretty golden. And I think that's probably what the latter two species have done in an evolutionary sense.
All right.
But to make the whole thing work, if you have everybody, all three species lockstep, it's going to basically help ensure all of these species can survive, right?
Right.
Under a predator satiation strategy.
All right. And just last one for now. How about the West Coast or other continents? Do you see them there?
There are cicadas in every continent all over the world except for Antarctica. If you go back to my Bug of the Week blog a little earlier this year, I wrote about tropical cicadas. They are in the New World tropics. You can go to the desert and see cicadas in the desert Southwest in California, in Europe. The Greeks wrote about cicadas, Herodotus, Pliny. So they're spread throughout history, but the tropical cicadas were deafening. I thought our cicadas here in North America, when we went to visit tropical cicadas in Costa Rica, it was actually painful. The decibel levels are up in the 100, above 100. They're incredibly noisy. So yeah, they're all over the place and very cool. Some of the ones in the Orient are very large and are actually eaten. And it's like a quarter-pounder cicada. So these are big cicadas.
Wow.
Okay.
That's it for now. I'll ask some other questions later in the presentation.
Now they have various calls. I'm going to show you one of our dog day cicadas calling. So oops, let me back that out. So you can see how the abdomen vibrates. This is one of our dog days. Okay, so there'll be various calls. One call is called the alarm call or squawk call. So when a predator attacks, they'll make a loud noise, the males. They also have calling songs, and this basically, there are several different types of calling song. One basically assembles all the members of one species in the same place. Okay, so each species will have distinct calling songs. Once they get up into the treetops, then the guys are going to switch to 3 different courtship songs. The first courtship song might be something like, hey, do you come here often? The second might be something like, oh, that's a really nice haircut you got. And the third one might be something like, hey, you know, it's a little crowded here. Let's get out of this place. So basically the guys, the big boy band is up there courting the females. Now, if the female likes it, she'll flick her wings, makes a little clicking sound, and then they hook up and off they go. But that's what the big boy bin in the treetops is all about. It's all about assembling the various species in courtship. So, can cicadas hear? How many think they can hear? Put your hands up. How many don't think they can hear? How many don't know? How many don't care whether they can hear or not? Well, listen, if bugs are singing, somebody's listening. So they do have an organ on their abdomen. It's a tympanum, it's an eardrum. So yes, both the males and the females can hear. So after they find each other and the courting is done, then it's time for a little bit of romance, right? This is a mating pair. They will kind of hook up and Don't ask me about they slightly got tired of my cameras. You can tell the females will have an ovipositor. The males will have a rounded abdomen. So that's how we differentiate between the female and the male. And again, all of these images and videos can be found at my Bug of the Week websites. Okay, the females are going to go up in the treetop and they're going to use their ovipositor to deposit eggs in what we call an egg nest. I'll run a little video of the female laying eggs. So you can see her abdomen, and each time she pumps, she's injecting an egg into that branch. Okay, so that's how the ovipositor inserts the eggs into the branches. It's going to take them several weeks to develop up in the treetops. After they develop, they're going to jump 80 feet from the surface of the earth. They're going to dive down, bounce twice, and they're going to burrow underground from a foot to 2 feet and spend the next 13 or 17 years underground sucking on plant sap. So the little tiny nymphs, this is what they look like when they emerge, and then they'll burrow down into the earth. Okay, now next year for me, it's going to be a very busy year. Whenever there's a cicada emergence, I have to spend, or I wind up spending pretty enormous amounts of time answering questions for folks in the media. One of the projects I finished up, and one of the first questions that always will be asked is, when will I see cicadas emerge? So using some citizen science data I'm going to talk about in a little while, we've just published a paper, it'll be out in a couple weeks in the Maryland Entomologist, how to predict when cicadas are emerging, using both degree days and day of the year. And what we found for cicadas here in the DC, Maryland metropolitan area, the very first cicada was sighted this past year just outside of Baltimore on April 19th. The very last ones were sighted in the DMV here about June 20th. So between those two windows, with a median date of about 148 or 147, whether it's Maryland, Virginia, or the other study site we had was in Ohio and Kentucky, between day 147 and 150, that's when most of the cicadas, or the average, the median number of cicadas will emerge. So that's when we can expect to see them, right around the first part of or in early May, okay? I've forgotten what day 150 is. I believe it's sometime in May, probably the first or second week, something like that, okay? So again, if you're interested in this paper, as I said, it will be published in the Maryland Entomologist in the September issue. Now, historically, cicadas have been described as poor defenseless species, never seen animals more entirely stupid than the 17-year-old locust. They make no effort to escape, but allow themselves to be captured with perfect passiveness. Well, not exactly. A paper I'm working on currently shows they actually do have some very clever defensive strategies, and I hope to have that paper published soon. But we know that it's kind of a hard knock life for cicadas. Here we see a periodical cicada being attacked and killed by a predatory stink bug. As I said, their friends, their relatives, the non-periodical cicadas, use disruptive coloration and rapid evasive flight. These depend on the massive synchronous emergence, predator satiation. They are not cryptic and they have slow flight. But what they are able to do at low temperatures, they will simply drop from the plants and play dead. It's called thanatosis. Many insects drop from their plants and make it difficult for predators to find. And when the temperature is warm enough, they are very good flyers. So we know that their escape responses now are temperature dependent. However, there are lots of things that like to eat cicadas. Birds are just going to have a heyday with these things. It's going to be incredible, the number of cicadas that are going to be eaten by birds. There are also predatory ants. So as they're molting and emerging and trying to develop, the ants will climb up the trees and pick them off. And they have one specialized pathogen called Magicicada. This particular pathogen waits 17 years in the ground until the cicada nymphs emerge. They then infect the nymphs. They go through a generation. They then begin to affect the adults. And this is very cool because it's an STD. It's sexually transmitted. The males will become infected, they will be drawn to the females, and vice versa. They will mate, and after they mate with one female, they will then go ahead and mate with another. They will actually attempt to mate, so their abdomens have now become the Magicicada, so they continue to infect other females. The other very interesting thing about this, one of our former graduate students just published a very interesting paper about this, is they basically zombieized the cicada, so the cicada will move higher up into the vegetation. So as the spores are produced, they will disperse farther and rain down on the ground and then be picked up 17 years later when the next brood of cicadas emerge. So they have an STD. Pretty clever of Magicicada. Okay, their final act, people have asked, well, what happens at the end of the cool thing here, two cool things. Number one, there are going to be massive numbers of these things feeding everything on the planet after they die. And the very nutrients that they, are going to release and recycle are going to go back exactly on the plants from which they emerge. And that's pretty cool. So the final act of contrition here is to basically fertilize the plants from which they were spawned. The other thing that really hasn't been researched yet is the number of holes they put in the ground. And these holes can be seen up to 2 to 3 years after they emerge. This is an incredible amount of soil aeration because these holes are going to be 18 inches or 2 feet deep. So, this I think is kind of pretty cool stuff, what they actually do in terms of nutrient cycling. There have actually been studies that show that plants will grow better the year after a cicada emergence. There's a couple reasons for that. And that other plants that grow in the habitat will benefit from this nutrient input. All right, what about cicada damage? Because the oviposition will create damage, right? When they lay those eggs in plants, there will be damage to the young terminals. Some of their most vulnerable trees are the ones that are native ornamental, native hardwood trees, things like maples and oaks. They'll also attack apples and cherries. They're going to go after ash, hawthorn, various kinds of nut trees, black walnuts, black locust, birch, dogwood, redbud. I've seen them ovipositing in perennial plants as well. Now, you'll hear a variety of things you could do when you have to deal with cicadas and potential damage. You've heard that you could wrap your tree in cheesecloth or netting. You could wrap bands of sticky stuff around your tree. or you could spray them with pesticides. And if we look at some of the over-the-counter pesticides, you know, we have things like synthetic pyrethroids, which in my opinion is one of the sledgehammers. I also work with arborists, but synthetic pyrethroids are extremely long-lasting. You'll see that cicadas are on the label, but why in the world anybody would like to kill cicadas with bifenthrin really does escape me. Sticky bands, I'm frankly not a big fan of this because cicadas are going to fly as well. Surely the nymphs are going to walk up into the trees, but they may be in a tree top 100 meters away and decide that the top of your oak tree is where they're going to hang out and mate, where the big boy band is calling the assembly. So in that case, that band isn't going to do anything. So here's what my recommendation is. The bottom panel here was a study we did back in 2006. What we did is we had trees that we did nothing with. We had trees we treated with a neonicotinoid insecticide, very potent, through the soil. And then we had trees that we simply put netting over, and we found the netting gave us almost perfect protection. The pesticide sprays gave us intermediate protection. And of course, the control trees had many more eggs being laid. This kind of mirrored a study that was done back in 1990, where they demonstrated that netting was by far the very best way to reduce cicada damage, was to net your trees. So, spraying is not going to be as effective. The cost is going to be comparable. If you decided you were going to spray, you'd have to spray every several days because the cicadas are going to move in and out. Your pesticides, of course, can be toxic to animals that eat cicadas. And again, you're going to have non-target effects on your pollinators and your natural enemies. So, you know, these are the kinds of charismatic creatures we're trying to protect in our landscapes. And those of you who know me and have heard me talk before know that one of my first priorities is to try to create ecosystems that work like ecosystems. That means minimizing disruptive inputs. Another caution, and I've already put out one announcement on this. I'm working with one community right now that was planning a very large planting of new trees this autumn. I'm saying, hold off. If you can delay your plantings until fall of 2021, now you're going to avoid the potential damage caused by the ovipositing female cicadas. And again, the netting will be widely available. We use something about a 3/8 of an inch. You don't really have to tie it at ground level. If you tie it around the bowl like this, you can basically keep the cicadas out. Now, there's a cautionary note here. Some people have put these nets on trees only to find they've enclosed bird nests that have already built their nests in those trees. So please don't enclose birds in there. Someone else cautioned me that snakes can get tangled up in this netting. So if you see snakes in the trees, get the snake out of the tree before you put your netting on. And if these are done correctly, your snakes, I don't believe that your snakes are going to get caught or make it past that tie down. But that is another caution that people have urged me, that snakes can get caught in this netting. So this is going to be your call. But if you have recent transplants or newly established trees, this really can become problematic. So with those caveats in mind, I think you proceed from there. Okay, so other things you can do, other things that will happen here. Well, first of all, like I said, everything on the planet is going to want to eat a cicada. Your pets are going to want to eat these things. They're high in protein. They're probably more nutrition than the cat food or dog food you're feeding them, but don't let them eat too many. I've heard some cases of dogs that were allowed to gorge on these things and wound up impacted. So put a little control on this. People don't like them in their swimming pools. Well, some people do like them in their swimming pools. I thought this was an incredibly clever swimming pool that actually had cicadas decorating the bottom of the pool. How cool is that? But, you know, skim them frequently. I personally will be eating lots of cicadas next year. People seem to enjoy nothing better than a bug geek eating cicadas, and I'm always happy to oblige when it comes to this. I've got no problem with it. And for me, you know, when we started the first media outreach on this, some of you may remember 2004 when we had a major effort basically to demystify cicadas. The first contact I had from the media was, oh my God, it's going to be the plague. The locusts are coming. This is going to be terrible. And I said, we're not doing that, gang. We're simply not going there. I said, this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for children of all ages to learn about all the different aspects of biology, development, phenology, the molting process, predation, parasitism, behavior, mating. So this is like having a National Geographic special in your own backyard when Brood's 10 cicadas are out. And I'll be mounting another effort very soon to try to enlist grad students and undergraduates in the job of helping to inform the public about all the fantastic learning opportunities there will be with the emergence of periodical cicadas. We'll have a lot of outreach. It may not be face-to-face, but we'll be holding venues like this via Zoom with school kids and the general public. Hopefully we got the vaccines by then, so we can go and do face-to-face and hands-on to help people learn about these amazing and very unique animals. Now, one of the fun things we did, we had a group of graduate students. We called ourselves the Cicada Maniacs. It was about 12 grad students that worked on this project. We shot a season.
Jenna, Cicadalicious is a bestseller.
I have some emergence cookies. I'm out on you guys before I put them in the cookbook, but basically they're just a chocolate cookie with a cicada on top, so it kind of looks like it's coming out of a pile of mud. This cookbook stuff has been just amazing. I kind of did it just on a whim. I thought it was going to be sort of a novel, fun thing, and so people are really into this idea of maybe eating some cicadas for a meal or two.
Cool. I Googled this morning. I saw that Cicadalicious is now at the top of the Google list, so rock on, you did it.
So is this like an Oreo where you save the middle for last, so you eat around the cicada?
So Cicadalicious became a bestseller. You can still find it online. The young lady, Jenna Jaden, has gone on to other media-related things. And, you know, I get asked to do silly stuff sometime, too. And I'm always, as I said, happy to apply.
Thanks, mate.
Here's your story. Jay, I tell you what, I'll give you $1 if you eat one. Delicious. They're wonderful.
Hey, Superman's father. That's right. And we don't have cicadas on Krypton.
They've got
delicious.
They've got a delicate nutty flavor.
Oh, nutty flavor. Fantastic.
A buttery texture.
Hey, it's better for you than a Cheeto, all right?
Better for you than Cheetos. You got it from the horse's mouth there, so to speak. So just remember, don't be shy about eating a cicada. Actually, when we did the Nat Geo special, we actually had a gourmet chef who prepared several different dishes with cicadas in them for the students and the folks to eat. So all good fun. Okay, so can you participate in cicada research? Absolutely. We're already mining the data from broods 8, 9, and 10 that we've collected to date. There is an app. It's called the Cicada Safari. It was developed by my colleague and co-author, Gene Kritsky at Mount St. Joseph's University. It's a free download. The way it works is you go out in the springtime, or you can look for the dog day cicadas. You snap a picture with your iPhone. It gets reported to the specialist who will then identify and vet the picture and make sure you really have photographed the cicada and not a stonefly or something like that, or a dragonfly. It then gets entered in the database. And what we're using this data for is to map out the geographic distributions of the different cicada species, and also to learn about their seasonal phenology. That data I showed you a little bit earlier basically was the first presentation of basically phenology or seasonality of the brood 10 cicadas in our area. So that's what we'll be using the data for. And we love all of you. I think this is going to be a great exercise for children, for adults, for anybody that's interested in nature, to download the app and go out and have a lot of fun taking pictures and looking for cicadas. It will really help the scientists learn a lot more about these very magical creatures. As I said, for those of you who are familiar with Bug of the Week, there are several stories over the last 10 years about cicadas. You can go there and search the archives and learn more about them. Two other excellent websites, of course, are the Cicada Media website, and also the University of Michigan has a wonderful cicada website as well. So with that, I want to thank my university. I want to thank you guys for inviting me into your homes tonight, and a whole list of scientists that work on cicadas, and my colleagues at the University of Maryland that help me tell bug stories. So thanks again for inviting me. And if we have time, I'd be happy to take any questions. I will remind you, however, that this is copyrighted material, please. So this is for your own use. This is not for redistribution or reuse. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to field questions.
Thank you so much, Mike. We do have a few questions that I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
First is just going to be about their damage to trees. And do they actually end up killing trees usually, or do they just create damage and they'll be okay next year? And what about the larger trees that you can't usually put netting around?
Yeah, the larger trees and the background of this picture, you can see you're not doing anything with that, gang. The large trees will be able to sustain this damage. Some of the branches are going to flag and drop off. This is called flagging. But the ones I worry about the most are going to be people that might be considering planting fruiting trees. The trees may not be outright killed, but when you have this many terminals, this is a willow oak tree, I believe, or a pin oak. This tree is going to be deformed for many, many years, and that cicada damage will remain. The branches become weakened. So if you can delay your planting, or if you can net these trees, you're going to be much better off. Once the trees are mature, they will be able to sustain the damage, and they'll come through just fine. But young trees will be at risk. Will they be outright killed? I'm trying to think. I think I can say yes, I have seen very young trees damaged to the point where they died. And if you couple this with a drought or an abiotic stress of some kind, a tree that's struggling in the first place, I think this could push it over the edge. Will a tree like that recover? Probably, but it will take many, many years before this achieves its normal habit, shape, density, branch structure. So my advice is to delay your plantings, and if you can't delay, or if you're recently planted, consider netting those trees.
Yeah, that makes sense. We also talked about cicadas that exist elsewhere in the world, and we had a question about cicadas that might exist in the desert, and if they eat anything else, since there's less trees there.
No, they find, the desert cicadas, they really fly fast, and they're using the xylem tissue of whatever woody plants are there. So the answer is yes. I mean, there are not cicadas in the middle of the Sahara or the middle of the Mojave where there are no trees. There has to be plant material, right? So they got to feed on something. But yes, there are cicadas that occur in the desert Southwest here in the United States. Absolutely.
All right. And how about increasing temperatures? Are they affecting our cicada broods?
That's one of our next research projects, and I think by this time next year we'll be able to answer that question. Yeah, that's one of my concerns and one of my research areas, again, is global warming and its effect. I think I've talked to you folks out at Audubon before, or if I haven't, I've got a really nice presentation on what climate change means for plants, insects, and natural enemies. So yeah, we are definitely concerned about that. No question.
Does temperature influence the speed at which they develop? We had a question about if there are faster cycles in the south because of that.
No, apparently what they're turned into, the most current theory now is that they're actually tracking you guys know, of course, that plants have hormones just like we do, and that these hormones fluctuate on an annual basis, linked to things like flushing of leaves, flowering, production of fruit, leaf abscission, and drop. So we have pretty good evidence now that underground, what they're doing is they're marking time by, remember, there's no photo period queue until the last year. So we think underground, what they're probably doing is monitoring fluctuations in plant hormone or nutrient levels, and that's how they're keeping time underground. We don't think it's necessarily temperature related. It's probably plant phenology related.
All right. Well, I'm going to do two more questions.
Okay.
The first is, other than the Dog Day, what annual cicadas are common in the DMV?
The Dog Day is a general term. We have,
okay.
I'm not sure how many species of what we call Dog Day cicadas. It's at least a half dozen. It's probably more than that. I really don't know the precise answer, but you can find this out pretty quickly. But there are dozens of these non-periodical cicadas throughout the United States. So the Dog Day is a general term, and it refers to Sirius, the dog star, attains its peak at this time of the year. It's not because it's hot and sweaty and the dogs are panting. So that's kind of a little misconception. It has to do with the dog star. They occur during that time period. So that's why they're called Dog Day cicadas, the dog days of summer. But there are several species here in Maryland. In fact, in one of the recent episodes of Bug of the Week, I talked about the cicadas that sing during the daytime. And then there is one or two species of cicada that just really crank it up just at dusk. And as dusk transitions into nightfall, that's when the katydids begin to sing. So go to the archives of Bug of the Week and you can learn a little bit more about our twilight singing cicadas here.
Wow, very interesting. All right, last one for the evening. You mentioned males mate several times. Do females mate and have eggs several times in a season? How many days / weeks do they live?
Yeah, it's, well, I'm just going to lay it right out to you, gang. What happens, these male cicadas are like cavemen, you know. They basically, after they mate, they produce what we call a copulatory plug. And what this is, it's the equivalent of a cicada chastity belt. So after he mates with her, he introduces this copulatory plug that prevents other guys from mating. Kind of the general rule in bugs is the last one in wins. It's called sperm priority. So the last one to mate usually is the sperm that gets used to fertilize the eggs. But the male cicadas have thought about this. They've evolved the copulatory plug. So they plug that female. She's not going to mate again, but he's going off to find some more babes. So the life is so unfair for these cicadas.
Wow.
So, but that's how it is, guys.
That is crazy. I actually have to ask this one because it's very interesting and I'm curious as well. Can you identify a cicada species by the shell only?
Well, you probably can. I can't. What our periodical cicadas will generally have slightly smaller shells than many of our Dog Day cicadas, which tend to be somewhat larger. But we can usually tell by the seasonality because there is a sequence with which these emerge. So the cicada shells I'm seeing right now on plants are Dog Day cicadas. But when I'm seeing cicada shells in April and May, I know that these are periodical cicadas. So probably there is a way to do that, but off the top of my head, I got to be honest with you, I don't know how to tell you how to tell the difference between the two. But the cicada shells, she shells, the cicada shells you're seeing now are basically dog day cicada shells.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike. That is all the questions that we have for you.
Well, boom, there we go.
Yep.
Well, thanks a lot, gang. It's been a pleasure being with you. And remember, get ready. Cicadas are coming.
Awesome.
Get,